Hey friends, it is Jenna, what is up, and welcome back to the Board Game Garden, and welcome to a preview of this game right here. This is En Route, or En Route, however you say it, and it is a stroll and write game. So this is published by Crowd Games, who's helping sponsor today's video, so a huge thank you to them, and it is designed by Philip Ivanov, and in En Route, you are tour guides trying to give the best tour or stroll to the specific tourists that you are guiding. So each of the maps is going to be different. There are several different maps. You can see on the front of here, there are a bunch of different stamps. So the map that I have in front of me here is the first play map. It is the first city where you can actually name your city, and it's the most basic of them. But as you get into the game and as you play more of it, there are some different maps that progress and get a little bit more difficult. Without further ado, if you guys want to see how En Route plays, then just keep on watching. I will have the link to the crowdfunding campaign down below if you are interested. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoy. Also hit that subscribe button down below if you've yet to do so. We'd love to have you here in the garden. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the aim of the game and the components of En Route, shall we? All right, so getting into a little bit of an aim of the game, En Route at its core is a flip and write. So you're gonna have cards that you're going to be flipping over. You are going to be drawing in. It's also a little bit of a route builder as well. And you're going to be creating some sort of route by the end of the game that is going to give you the most victory points by taking the tourists that you have, because you are a tour guide, on the best possible tour that you can, taking them to the places that they want to go in various cities. So there are cities, like I said, the first city, which is like the first play, or just introducing you to the game. You also have Hong Kong, you have London, you also have New York. They're all different maps and kind of progress and get a little bit more challenging, like I mentioned. So in this game, there is a little bit of a change of mechanics though when it comes to that flip and write mechanic. So really excited to kind of show you guys how we get into that. But basically the game plays over 10 rounds, and each round, each player is going to be playing down a card, and then the active player is going to get the chance to discard a card in order to ultimately have 2 cards for everyone to use for the coordinates that you're going to be using, as well as the different tourists you're going to be adding to these different locations. There are going to be normal locations where you're going to be adding those different tourists. There's going to be special kind of landmark locations that specific tourists are going to want to be near or by. And then, like I said, by the end of the game, you are ultimately wanting to get that best route. You're going to be able to erase some of the spots and pick out the best route you possibly can that you've created over the game, and then you're going to score points in various ways on that. So yes, I also wanted to add that in the campaign, so if you guys go and check that out down in the description box, there are a bunch of different locations that I don't even have here in the prototype. I will say as well that this is a prototype, so there is nothing on the back. It is a prototype, so everything here is subject to change. But in the campaign, they're going to have even more locations that come in the game. There's additionally going to be Rio de Janeiro, there's going to be Cairo, as well as Paris. But anyways, that is everything for the aim of the game and kind of what to expect in the game. I will be going into more depth with the rules and stuff in the overview of the game and the how to play. But let's go quickly over all of the components here, which, like I mentioned, again, is a prototype, but each player is going to start with their own board, which I have some multiple boards here. Like I said, you will start with the first city board, which is simply just the most basic of boards to kind of introduce you to the mechanics of the game. And also this can be played with some younger children. The game plays 1 to 4 players. It is 14 plus, but I do think that if you play it with this map, you might be able to have children younger than that to play, and it's 20 to 40 minutes. But that is the first city. Everyone can name their own city, and everyone has the same map, but slightly different coordinates, which I will get into. You also have this one here, which this is going to give you 3 additional maps. So you have London on this side, you have Hong Kong on this side, and then it's actually very cool where you actually open it up and then this entire thing is New York. Like I said, you're gonna have 3 other ones as well, and possibly some more. But those are the maps. Each of them are pretty similar, but like I said, you will have some added mechanics and some added things to the certain cities that you're playing with as you kind of increase that difficulty. So each player is going to have their map. Each player is also going to have 4 different colors of markers. So you do have the 3 basic ones, which is blue, red, and green. These are going to represent 3 different types of tourists. So I believe the green are people that like nature and all things kind of earth, very earthy things like parks and, you know, nature. The red ones are going to like very busy, kind of people-filled spaces, and then the blue is going to like more of that historic things, so museums and stuff like that. So those are the 3 different types of tourists there. And then you also do have the purple, which comes into play when either you are drawing in your route, which they do say in the rule book you can just do everything in one color because the tourists are also represented by different shapes. But if you do want it to be a little bit easier to see, then you would use the colors, but the purple would be used for your physical paths. The 3 tourist colors would be used to put in those different tourists. And then also additionally, I believe that the purple is going to come into play with some of the more complicated maps. So those are the 4 colors there. Each player also does have a player reference. So you're gonna have a player reference with the red side, but then you also have the other side, which you flip it over to this side when you are the active player. So this is actually kind of representing a like first player mechanic as well. So when you are the first player or the starting player or the active player of the round, you're going to have the green side face up. And then when it goes to the next round, the next person will flip theirs over. You will flip yours back to the normal player reference side. And this kind of helps you when you are the active player. You have a few more things to do on your turn compared to if you were just like a normal player. So that is the round structure player reference there. Next up, we have some goal cards in front of me here. This is an optional thing that you can play with or without. Obviously, if you play with those goal cards, it's going to make the game a little bit more challenging, give you more to kind of focus on as you are creating these routes. But they do recommend that if you are playing with some younger people or people that are newer to the game to decide to play without the goals at first and then kind of introduce them a little bit later. But if you are more experienced with gaming, then obviously you can include those goals, because I feel like in a lot of board games, goals are just a really nice thing to have where you're kind of focusing on those goals and trying to achieve those goals, which is always fun for me. So those are the goals up there. You also have the deck of cards here, which depending on what map you're playing with, there's going to be some different cards that you're going to be shuffling in here. But basically these are the tourist cards. So these are going to have different numbers. And then they're also going to have different colors of tourists. And then they're also going to additionally have these landmarks, which whenever a card is picked that has a landmark, you're going to be looking at the like city board. Each of the different cities is going to have a city board. And this is going to be where you're going to be marking off the different landmarks. So as more landmarks come up for the tourists, so as more tourists want to see these specific landmarks, the more victory points you are going to get for passing those landmarks. So obviously, the more people that want to see them, the better you as a tour guide is going to be, because you're going to be taking all those tourists to the places that they want to go. So we have some different landmarks there for each of the different cities. Like I said, you have these ones here as well, which is for Hong Kong and London. And also on the back here, you do have 2 for New York, because New York, like I said, is a big boy map here, and this one's going to definitely be that finishing map that you play when you've played all of the other ones and you really want that big challenging flip and write games. So that is everything for the city boards. There's also a solo mode, which you guys know here on the Board Game Garden. We love when a game has a solo mode. So there are some solo reference cards here. And I feel like always roll and writes and flip and writes, they just lend themselves really well to solo games. So yeah, awesome that it has a solo component or a solo variant. And then you do have the additional cards for each of these cities. So I have these 3 stacks here. This stack is for London. London does have these like underground cards additionally that you add in there. You also have the New York stack as well as the Hong Kong stack. And then again, like I said, there's going to be more cities as well. So a lot of variation in the game, but I believe that is everything for all of the components. You have some additional goal cards over here. You're always going to have some goal cards to shuffle up and choose. You're always going to have a C goal, a B goal, a B goal, and an A goal each game, and they're all going to be different each game. So anyways, that is everything for a little bit of an aim of the game and the components of En Route, but let's get into exactly how the game plays. All right, so like I mentioned in the aim of the game, En Route is played over 10 rounds, and this is going to be the same for any of the maps that you choose to use. And there's actually on every single one of these city player boards, or sorry, these city main board, there's going to be a round tracker at the bottom. So there's always going to be those 10 rounds. And basically you're just going to map it out however you want. You could just check whenever you're finished a round. You could put in the coordinates each round to kind of keep track of the different coordinates each round, which I think would be pretty helpful because you will eventually, by the end of the game, be able to check that you've been to all of the specific coordinates that were selected each round. But yes, it's going to be played over 10 rounds. Once the 10 rounds is finished, each player is going to have a bunch of different lines and routes and tourists on their board here. And you can, at the end of the game, then decide one main route that you want to decide on. You will erase any of the other streets that you decided to put out throughout the game. You're going to decide on that one main route, and then you're going to score victory points based off of that one main route, whatever tourists are around it, whatever landmarks and locations you passed, so on and so forth. The game will start with the active player, which whoever has the active player side of their reference face up is going to deal out 3 cards to each player. So I will deal those out. And then each player, the active player as well as the neighboring players of the active players. So not everyone is going to be placing down a card if it is a 4-player game. But I will mention that in a 3- and 4-player game, the first few rounds are a little bit different, just to make sure that each player has the same amount of rounds where they are the active player. As you are the active player, you do have quite a bit of control on what ultimately the coordinates and the location is going to be for that round. So let's get into exactly how this plays. So at the beginning of the round, each player is going to look at their 3 cards, and like I said, the active player as well as the 2 people, the 1 player on their left and 1 player on their right, are going to choose a card from their hands. They're going to have 3 here, and I'm going to just kind of give you guys a little bit of an overview of the cards and what exactly they mean. So in the top left-hand corner, there's always going to be a number. Basically, every city is going to have the same layout of a 6x6 grid. So when you are choosing these coordinates, they are going to be 2 different numbers from 1 to 6, and that's going to determine the kind of meetup spot in the specific location that you're going to choose each round. So if the numbers are the same, it's only going to be 1 location, but if the 2 coordinate numbers are different, so for example, if one is a 6 and one is a 4, you could either do 6 and 4, or you could do 6 and 4, if that makes sense. So depending on if you choose the horizontal or vertical to be the 6 or the 4. So each player is going to choose a card with that number in the top left-hand corner. And then there's also going to be a tourist color, shape, and amount of tourists under that. So most of the time it is just 1 or 2 tourists of a certain color. So the red is a circle, the blue is a triangle, the green is a square, and then, like I said, the hexagon, you will use it in some of them, or it might be a octagon, I'm not 100% sure. A pentagon, I don't know, a 5-sided shape. That's going to be used in specific cities. And then also some of the tourist cards do have a landmark location at the bottom, which I will get into how that exactly works. But those 3 players that are going to be choosing, each player that is in that round is going to pick a card. So we'll just kind of choose a card here. Let me choose that one there. Each player will keep the rest of the cards that they didn't use. So for example, if we did have a 3-player game here, we would have 3 cards that the active player would now be able to choose from. So the active player will keep whatever card they chose to play, and then they have to decide which one of their neighbor's cards they want to keep and which one they want to discard, because ultimately you only want 2 numbers in your coordinate and 2 cards picked each round. So I might decide as the active player to discard this one with the 2 circle tourists and decide to keep this one that has a 2 and 2 triangle blue tourists. So these would be the finished active cards here. We would place them out for every player to see, and those would be the 2 cards that everyone would use that round. So then once those 2 cards were picked and on the table, there's still one more quick thing that we'd have to do. We would check the cards to see if there was a landmark. So in this situation there is the School of Illusion and Pottery. I've almost said poetry many times, but the School of Illusion and Pottery, you would then take any marker and then someone would just check off the first box of the School of Illusion and Pottery. So basically this is that more and more of the tourists that you are taking on this tour want to see that specific location. So the more people that you get to show that specific location on your tour, the more points you're going to get. So as it shows up more, the more points that it is going to accumulate. But yes, after that was checked off, you would move into the drawing phase, which I will quickly add that the phase that we just finished was called the round card selection phase, and that's just the phase of everyone choosing a card, the active player then discarding one of their neighbor's cards, choosing basically what the coordinate cards are going to be for the round, checking off any special landmarks, and then moving on to the drawing round, which we are in now. So every player would look at the 2 cards on the table. Every player would then look at their board and they would look at the coordinates. So in this situation, the coordinates is 2 and 6. So the player would look for 2 and 6 and go to the 1 location, and then there's also an optional one of the 6 and the 2 here. So there are 2 different locations that each player would then be able to choose from. I might decide to do this one here, which is the 6 and the 2, the Amber Submarine, which is one of the like special locations. And then each player would, in that location that they chose, put in the tourists that are on the cards. So in this situation, we have 1 red circle and 2 blue triangles. So we would take those 2 colored markers, we would draw in the blue triangles and the circle. And I will add that whenever you place tourists into a location, that location becomes occupied and you cannot place any more tourists into that location. So if those specific coordinates came up on a future round and both of the locations are actually already occupied and already have tourists in it, if that happens, then basically you get to put any colored tourists in any location on your board, but just 1. And then the next thing in the drawing phase, once every player has put in the different tourists into a specific location, they would take their marker and they would chart out a route. So basically each round you are going to be able to put in 2 sections. So that's going to be 2 sides of one of these squares. So like I said, you have 6 by 6 grid of squares. So you're going to be able to put in 2 sections each round, whether that be in 1 straight line of 2 squares, or if it's 1 line on one side of a square and then another line on another side of the square, kind of representing an L on the board, you can put in 2. And those different sections must be touching the location that you place those tourists in. So for example, I might decide to go 1 and 2 and a little L around that square. Additionally, you can decide, instead of doing 2 continuous sections, you can decide to do 1 single section anywhere on the board. And in each city, there are different cafes, and these are represented by the cafe bonuses. So there are different coffee cups throughout the map that if you ever touch a coffee cup, you are able to circle it, and it's either going to be some sort of instant benefit that you get, or it's going to be a benefit that you can circle, and then eventually, whenever you want to use it, you can scratch it out and use that specific ability. And there are 3 different types of cafes and 3 different kind of things that they will get you, or different rewards that they will get you. One is that you can plus or minus 1 from a coordinate. So if I, for example, didn't want to use the 2 and the 6, I could decide to change the 6 to a 5 and have it be 2 and 5. That's a good way to get around the locations that already are occupied. You can decide to change the coordinates slightly so that you can actually place the tourists into an unoccupied location. So that's one of them. Also, there are some that allow you to place tourists right away in the location that you are placing things in already that round. And then lastly, you also have the additional section or like route section that you can draw in. So you have a coffee cup that has a purple road, and that just simply allows you to add an additional section to your route. So that is pretty much everything for the drawing phase. You would then move into the last phase, which is pretty much just an admin phase that is called the refill phase. So this would simply be that the 2 cards that were used for the coordinates that round would be discarded. Each player that did put out a card that past round would pick up another card so that their hand is always at 3. And then whoever was the active player that round would flip over their card to the normal player reference. The next person in turn order would flip theirs over to the active player reference, and then you would move on to the next round. This would play over and over again, the selection of the cards, the drawing on the map for those 10 rounds. Each player would then look down at their city map and ultimately come up with the final route that they want to take their tourists on. So picking a starting location and an ending location, and then mapping out that exact route that they wanted to take their tourists on to get the most victory points. And obviously, as you're playing this game, you're going to be placing different sections or different roads throughout the game by all of these different locations. So you're gonna not have one distinctive route at the end of the game. You're going to have a bunch of different routes, different branches, and you are ultimately going to have to kind of decide the exact route that you want to pick for the end game scoring, and then erase anything else that is not on your route. So throughout the game, you're really wanting to try to get, you know, different roads in different spots so that you do have options at the end of the game, depending on, you know, how popular certain landmarks got and the tourists that are out, because you are going to be getting victory points based off of how many tourists of certain colors you have times or multiplied by how many of that specific tourist location you pass by. So you might actually see at the end of the game that you have a lot of these circle tourists, and you maybe want to plan your route to kind of go by as many of those circle locations to make all of those circle, it's funny just referring to them as a shape. So you're going to try to go to as many of those specific locations as possible at the end of the game to get the most victory points. So yes, let's quickly get into the final scoring. They've made it very easy because they do have the final scoring on each player's board on the right side here and at the bottom. Then you do have the total in the bottom right-hand corner, but each player is going to look down at their city map. They're going to see their final definitive route that they're taking their tourists on, and then everybody's gonna go through scoring. So the first thing up here are the goals. So you're gonna go through each of the goals, A, B, and C, and see how many victory points you ultimately get for those. You also have the common landmarks. So you have the yellow landmarks, which are simply just going to get you a certain amount of victory points. I believe they are 5, 6, or 7 victory points. If you do pass by those, you're gonna get those victory points. The gray landmarks are going to be the ones that you were checking off here on the board. So the more tourists that want to see those landmarks, the more they're going to be worth. So each of them are either going to be 3, 5, 7, or 10 victory points each if you do pass by those. You also have any unused cafe bonuses. So if you have any unused ones, those are going to be 2 victory points. And you also have the little hand symbol, which I did not touch on, but basically this is, I think it's called the Visit Them All icon. But basically you are going to get victory points if you pass through these different intersections, and the more that you pass through, the more victory points that you get. But then also at the bottom, like I was touching at with the different tourist colors. So based on how many tourists you have along your route of certain colors, they are going to be multiplied by the amount of that specific tourist locations that you pass through. So for example, if I ended up passing through, let's say, 3 different blue locations, or passing by 3 blue locations, and I had 4 different, or let's say, you'll probably have more than that. You'll probably have like, you know, let's say 6. We had 6 triangle blue tourists along the way as well. So you're going to do 6 times 3, so you would get 18 victory points for the blue tourists, and you would go through for the green tourists as well as the red tourists. And then once you had finished with all of that scoring, you would total up your score in the bottom right hand corner, and the player with the most victory points would win. And if there was a tie, I believe it's the player that passed by the most landmarks on their route would be the winner. But yes, that is a quick overview of how En Route plays. I will mention that there are some additional rules for some of these other maps, additional things that you have to keep in mind. I'm not going to get too much into those, but definitely go and check out the description box link to the campaign if you guys want to see more about all of the other maps. But obviously it makes it a little bit more challenging and brings in some more scoring opportunities for each of those maps. So yeah, that is everything for the overview of En Route. All right, friends, so that is going to be everything for today's preview of En Route. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, please give this video a big thumbs up. Also hit the subscribe button down below if you've yet to do so. We'd love to have you here in the garden. Comment down below if En Route is something that you guys are interested in. Like I said, I will have the link to the campaign down below if you want to go and see more about it. And if you are interested in it, possibly backing it over there on the campaign. Huge thank you again to Crowd Games for sponsoring today's video. I love you guys so much. Remember, you are somebody's reason to smile, and I will see you guys in the next board game video. Bye, friends.